Welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and joining me this week, all the way from New Hampshire, after a long excursion of incubating another human being and bringing it forth to the world, we have the triumphant return of the Reverend Tracy.
Yes, hi, I am back. I'm alive. I survived childbirth and everything. Like everything's cool. Yeah, it just seemed like, the baby Reverend is doing great. And since he's getting big enough to be fairly independent, thought I'd finally try to end my extended maternity leave on the show. So I'm glad to be back finally.
Well, I'm glad you're back as well. But before we dive into talk about the Baby Reverend and all the fun that has been, how about we lighten things up and talk about abortion?
Oh, yeah, because I thought, what better, and I thought my return should be accompanied by a nice, light, fluffy topic. So I messaged Tim and said, Tim, let's talk about the pros and cons of abortion. Let's just start there. The thing I didn't do.
Yeah, you see that? Yeah, that's not me. But yeah, I know in a couple episodes back on our election episode, our friends at home that may have listened to that may have heard me say that we tried not to put our toes in the water too much about political stuff, but that doesn't mean we don't at all. But I think the goal that the Reverend Tracy and I have had from the start when we talk about that is to do our best to acknowledge that there is more than one way to think about an issue. That doesn't mean you have to agree with the other side, but more often than not, and I've been very much guilty of this, people find themselves in an echo chamber of people that only agree with them, and everybody that disagrees with them ends up being a monster. And when it comes to something as important as women's health, I think people do need to take the time to sit back and hear the other people out. Because, again, you may not agree with somebody, but if you can find out where they're coming from, then maybe you can get closer to finding some common ground in an ideal world.
Oh, exactly. And I just know this is such a topic this year. And I do tend to lean a little bit more towards the political nerdiness, especially as everybody starts talking about it. And sometimes you hear people say things like, oh, okay, I don't really have to take you too seriously. I don't think you understand how this works. But I do want, because I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of how things become legal or illegal, right? I just like to talk about the topics that are hot, that people say really sway their political decisions right now. So maybe they can just consider hearing both sides of it just real quick, especially as we're going into the Thanksgiving season and everything too, where people do tend to talk about politics more at the table.
Exactly. So what we are going to do here is go through an article here from our friends at procon.org called Should Abortion Be Legal? And go through the pros and the cons and just open up some discussion. How about I dive into the first pro?
Go for it.
All right. Pro number 1, abortion is a safe medical procedure that protects lives. The death rate for legal abortions is 0.7 deaths for every 100,000 abortions. By contrast, there are 1 to 2 deaths per 100,000 plastic surgery procedures, 3 deaths for every 100,000 colonoscopies, and 3 to 6 deaths per 100,000 tonsillectomies. Childbirth has 9 deaths per 100,000 deliveries. The abortion pill has a better safety record than common over-the-counter drugs, including Tylenol, as well as prescriptions like penicillin and Viagra. Medication abortion, a combination of mifeprex and misoprostol, has a mortality rate of 6.5 deaths per 1 million patients. Pregnancy-related maternal deaths could increase 20% in the United States with abortion bans. Amanda Stevenson, sociology professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, explained, people with resources are more likely to make it out of state or find out about medical abortions. People who can't are more likely to have health issues, to live in poverty, and have less access to resources. People of color are especially likely to be in the latter category and thus negatively impacted by abortion bans. The predicted 20% maternal death rate does not include those who will die from back alley or illegal abortions because legal options were not available. Globally, 45% of abortions are unsafe, 97% of which take place in developing countries. According to the World Health Organization, Evidence shows that restricting access to abortions does not reduce the number of abortions. However, it does affect whether the abortions that women and girls attain are safe and dignified. The proportion of unsafe abortions are significantly higher in countries with highly restrictive abortion laws than in countries with less restrictive laws. And this will be a little voice memo for future Tim out there to find this statistic and put it in the show description if I can. But I heard recently that your home state of Texas has had some increased numbers of women being hurt and dying thanks to a Texas abortion ban. And yeah,
it's unfortunate, but yes, that's Texas. That's been kind of a long road, right? Because I don't even remember when it was legal or illegal, because it was just so not in the discussion for me as a kid. Again, I was raised in the Bible Belt, right? Like, it didn't matter to me if it was legal or not. I was never going to do it.
These arguments that you hear the uber conservative politicians make just don't ever ring true, because the evidence just continues to show that, again, as this pro here stated, women that are desperate enough will find a way to get those abortions. The number of abortions don't stop because of a lack of official health care out there. But, if you have to go to a quote unquote back alleyway, just some other way that is not at a hospital or a service provider for this, who knows what could happen. I mean, that doesn't mean the person is doing the, back alley abortion isn't trying their best, but if they don't have all the proper tools available and poke in the wrong area, who knows what could happen. I mean, there are definitely arteries that could be affected if a certain poke happened the wrong way. And let's also mention the economic factor in all this as well. I think they briefly touched upon it. I mean, these abortion bans that we're seeing in the United States now are affecting poor people and minorities the worst. And it's just a way to, in a way, it's a form of slavery, in my opinion.
Right. And it's funny that you bring up Texas, because Texas has always been a little bit at the heart of this discussion. Roe v. Wade, that was Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County, Texas. And the lawsuit was challenging the Texas law that made abortion illegal. So I think that's why more people are going to be more likely to talk about Texas and all this. And by the by, if any of those medications sounded vaguely familiar, as Tim or I would have struggled through them too, by the way, because I'm not going to pretend to know how to pronounce them, and I used to work in a fucking pharmacy. But that's one of the big talking points there for a little while, was one was being made banned, but what about the other one? And this has made it even safer to do. So this is all part of the bigger conversation, is why are we taking this away, right? Especially if it's shown that abortion rate doesn't go down. It just gets done differently. And the other little thing touched on in that pro is that medical tourism actually isn't good. If you haven't heard of that term before, strongly recommend looking into it, and how it actually has a very negative effect on the local, like you said, people of color or people of lower income status. It really has a negative effect in those areas for medical tourism.
Yeah, I mean,
the answer shouldn't be go to another state for it, I guess, is a more blunt way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it was briefly touched upon. I mean, as we record this, we're a day past when the vice presidential debate happened, and they did mention that, there are definitely people that do take advantage of that. And how is women's health care, how is that something that should be a state by state choice? That should be in an ideal world a basic human right, to where you shouldn't have to worry about whether you're in Alabama or New York or California or Georgia. You should be able to get the same level of health care in any of those states. And it's mind-boggling.
Right, exactly. And it all goes back to, it's going to happen. Why not at least make it happen safely?
Indeed.
So I guess we can go ahead and roll into con number one. So
Let's do it.
con number one goes into life begins at conception, making abortion murder. Conception is the moment a sperm cell fertilizes an egg cell, which begins the process of cell division that creates a human life. Tara Sander Lee, Senior Fellow and Director of Life Sciences at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, stated life begins from the moment of conception when the sperm fertilizes the egg, because there is the creation of a new, totally distinct, integrated organism, or a human being, which is going to be biologically distinct from all other life forms on this planet. The first cell is biologically distinct because it has its own DNA that is different from either biological parent and all other humans. Ending a life is murder legally and ethically, even a life that is only a few growing cells at the time of death. Pope Francis explained, abortion is murder. Those who carry out abortions kill. At the third week after conception, often even before the mother is aware of being pregnant, all the organs are already starting to develop. It is a human life, period, and this human life has to be respected. It is very clear, scientifically, it is a human life. That people may face difficulties without abortion as an option does not excuse or justify murder. A reader of The Atlantic who gave only the initial K clarified the moral dilemma. I wish that I could be pro-choice because the awful circumstances so many women face, that I can't even imagine facing, seems so much more real to me than the rights of a fetus who doesn't even always look human. But abortion is the intentional killing of a human being, and we look back with horror at anyone in history who decided a group of people did not actually count as people. We cannot solve the problem of injustice against women with more injustice. We need solutions that support women without killing fetuses. And so, there's a lot about that stance to absolutely respect. But unfortunately, and this is, by the way, guys, I decided to pick the cons pretty much because I was raised in the Bible Belt, like I mentioned at the beginning, at the first pro. So I did believe this for a long time, that it should never, ever, ever be legal because, it's abortion and we should be doing God's will and everything, right? And now, while there are some points here, unfortunately, I think what always gets me about this argument nowadays is these are the same people kind of fighting teaching proper sexual education. You know what I mean? So as far as we need solutions, oh, absolutely. But can you support the other solution? Which is actually giving education. I was having a discussion with somebody recently about, should abortions be allowed when it is somebody that is being irresponsible with sex? And I said, well, at what point do we look at, are they being irresponsible or are they simply uneducated? And I think one of my favorite stories I've heard, and this is the human that I'm going to talk about happens to be from Texas. Not the person who's telling us the story. So my partner and I had met a fellow veteran, and she was talking about this young woman who turned out to be pregnant. Basically, what she came to find out was she really believed she could not be pregnant, like that there was something wrong with these tests. And she kept saying, because I'm not married. So for some reason, the level of education that sunk through to this individual was that she thought it was physically impossible to get pregnant unless she was married. And I know that seems really ridiculous to a lot of you guys, but that there is the power of being raised to believe a certain thing, especially if that thing, because I don't think that was ever their intention to teach that, right? I very much think that they had intended to teach, hey, you need to wait until marriage to have sex, to then get pregnant. Not, oh, well, I guess that's my birth control method is just no ring on the fingy, right? So at what point do we look at it's actually these people not being educated? And how much should we make it restrictive when kind of part of the problem, quote unquote problem here with needing abortion in our culture is that lack of education that you hear about? It feels like constantly almost that we're fighting this.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed it on the show plenty of times that you will have these parents that will fight tooth and nail at school board meetings about not having sex ed being taught in the schools because it needs to be taught in home. And then you hear stories like this, and I think back to that one story you talked about a young student who told her teacher that my uncle licked my cookie. but you found
Right.
out that cookie meant another word altogether. When you talk in code like this to young kids, especially, they're not going to understand, and it's going to not give them all the right information. And you were definitely correct. I think the pro-life movement in this country doesn't have a solution for the other parts, because if this is just meant to get people to quote unquote be responsible about the act of procreation and all that stuff, fine, but have
Right.
proper sex ed, have proper, stuff available too. Because what about the young married couple that, is in their 20s and wants to establish themselves in their career first before they have a kid? Should they
Right.
just not have sex? I mean, to some people would say yes, but that is foolhardy. Come on, young people that are married in their 20s are going to have sex.
Right. And I guess like to really, really approach this con at its subject line, right? Is it murder? Now, for those that recall, or if I've ever mentioned, I did go to a Christian school. It was Church of Christ teaching, but it was Christianity, the Bible, the New Testament, everything that we come to know and love, and includes Jesus, right? The Bible actually does not directly say anywhere where life begins. So, there's a lot of sorry, my son's drumming on a box. I have no idea if that came through, but if you hear any noise in the background, it's because the Baby Reverend is kind of allowed to play around me. But yeah, so it's like, for example, in Genesis, it kind of more implies that life begins when a human takes its first breath. In Psalms, Jeremiah, Job, there's are verses that do imply that an unborn is a valuable human being. So, et cetera, et cetera. It goes back and forth, but it doesn't actually say. So you have to keep in mind that this idea that somebody is murdering, if you were going to accuse somebody of murder, that's technically not something that we even know it is at that point. Does that make sense? Like, because this is up to biblical interpretation.
And
Like when it begins. So is it murder, or are you calling somebody a murderer and thereby judging them when it's not necessarily supposed to be the place to judge?
And that's the thing, too. I mean, if you look back at the history of the pro-life movement in the United States, like before the 70s, before it really became a big thing, there were a number of religious organizations out there that had zero issue with their parishioners getting abortions. I mean, the Catholics were always, going to be against it, but a number of others didn't. Jewish people that, did not have an issue with abortion, and yeah, it didn't really end up becoming that big of a deal until the 70s. And so, like, yeah, you cannot base an important decision like this on a religious teaching that not everybody even agrees upon. And that's another thing, too. Like, a pope, someone that is in Catholic clergy, my understanding is those people are not meant to, they're meant to be celibate. So why are we taking the word of a man who's never seen a vagina before in person about whether an abortion should be is legal or not?
Right. And also, you have to take that into context. Why do you care about Pope Francis's opinion when you're not Catholic? That's the whole, like, he's supposed to clarify to the specific group of people, correct? So he is saying that, hey, is this what do you call the Pope even? Like the official like speaker for God is saying, yes, we would consider this murder in the Catholic faith. But to your point, it is not necessarily the place of our laws and our government to uphold religious interpretation and to uphold religious quote unquote laws. I do believe that a lot of those really should be separate from our legal laws, is like what you're allowed to do, right? For example, there's no law against eating, dairy, like cheese and meat together. But yet the Old Testament, it talks a lot about it.
Yeah, and
So yeah,
I
lying, for example, isn't technically illegal. Lying under oath is a problem, but lying in general, that's somewhat, I guess, freedom of speech almost. So we're not aligning all of our laws to religious rule, just for some reason like this one.
Yeah, and I think one thing I do want to point out here too is that what I'm not saying, and I think I can speak for you here by saying that you're not seeing this as well, is that for a consenting adult out there that wants to believe this and have this be the philosophy of their life, like, this is America. That's what we fought for that religious freedom. And if that's what you want to do as a consenting adult, then by all means go ahead and do it. But again, you can't legislate your beliefs onto other people, because it's frankly just wrong. And also too, I did notice here that they talked about that, scientifically it is a human life. Like, is it though? Has science really come back and said that that little zygote inside is a human life at the exact time of conception?
Oh, exactly.
All right, pro number 2, abortion bans endanger healthcare for those not seeking abortions. Medical treatment for non-viable pregnancies is often exactly the same as an abortion. Ectopic pregnancies occur when a fertilized egg implants somewhere other than the uterine cavity. About 1 in 50 pregnancies are ectopic, and they are non-viable. Bleeding from ectopic pregnancies caused 10% of all pregnancy-related deaths, and ectopic pregnancies were the leading cause of maternal death in the first trimester. Other pregnancies can be non-viable, including when there is little or no chance of the baby's survival once it is born, or if the baby has died in utero. The treatment for ectopic and other non-viable pregnancies is often the same as that for an abortion. 1 out of every 10 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. The drugs used for medication abortions are the only treatment recommended for early miscarriages. For later or complicated miscarriages, the same surgical procedure used for abortions is recommended. While some abortion bans include specific exceptions for non-viable pregnancies and miscarriages, other bans are too vague to be practicable. Healthcare providers may refuse to perform a procedure that could be interpreted as an on-demand abortion for fear of liability or prosecution. Arguing that doctors and others use them as loopholes for on-demand abortions, lobbyists are working to eliminate exceptions altogether, which would further endanger and traumatize people seeking care for dangerous medical conditions. Some pharmacists have refused to fill prescriptions for miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies because the drugs can also be used for abortion. In Texas, pharmacists can be sued for aiding and abetting an abortion. Further, bans are a slippery slope to contraceptive and other healthcare restrictions. For example, some already wrongly view Plan B, the morning after pill, as an abortifacient. I don't know what that word means or says, and are thinking of including it in abortion bans. Yeah, I mean, I think of that story that we heard that when Roe v. Wade was overturned about that 10-year-old who was raped by a family member in Ohio who had to have an abortion. Just stuff, these bans are just barbaric. It honestly would be one thing if we were talking about like a ban at the 15, 16 week level that did have proper exceptions. It's like not a perfect world type of thing, but my understanding is that statistics show usually women by the 15th or 16th week are generally aware that they are pregnant and will either choose to carry it on the rest of the time or, have it taken care of by that particular point. So it's like it would be one of those things where if something like that were nationwide, that would be fine. But again, these people just they have this bizarre illusion that taking it away from everybody will just make everything better. And I think of those politicians that talked about the ectopic pregnancies. We'll just have the little zygote or whatever removed from the place where it's not supposed to be, and then put it back into the uterine lining, which it can't do.
Right. And again, I love that Texas comes right back up again, but these medications are important. And I think, because what's funny is the people who want to say that this should be illegal are the same people saying that government should be more limited and not have as many rules. And if that's really going to be your spirit about it, and we're really going to, at least care about atopic pregnancies and things that really do endanger the health of both the mother and the child, really at that point, is really just go back to leaving it up to the doctors. get rid of the federal level ban and leave it up to doctors, because I know one of those big things that was kind of said that I did believe for a while is they're forcing doctors to do this. And then I later found out as I grew up that is literally like never happened. Like, to my knowledge, please feel free. Like, I've always been welcome in this show. It's like, oh nope, here was this guy that was held at gunpoint, or this doctor was going to lose his license if he didn't abort on this woman. By all means, please share that information with me. But when I looked this up, when I first started challenging my very pro-life, because I do believe you can be pro-life, but not necessarily to the level that you need to force that on other people, right? You can have your belief without pushing. But I used to be like, I'm pretty sure if there had been, an abortion clinic near me at one point when I was living in Texas and feeling this way, I probably would have been on the picket line.
Ooh.
Yeah,
well, thank you.
I can own that. I can own that, though. And I think that's why it's so important for being open to challenging those beliefs that you've had, especially since childhood, because really it was one of those that opened me to, wow, a lot of my beliefs aren't really mine. A lot of my beliefs seem to be just what I was told was the right thing to do, and that was the right thing to do. And shit, even young Sheldon kind of made fun of the hell houses for Halloween time. And there was always an abortion gone wrong room, I swear. Like, I never went to any of them because I've never been into gore, but there was always that, oh, she's having an abortion and she's bleeding out, but I guess she's going to go to hell because her last thing was being okay with the murder of her baby. And like, that was almost always a thing in there. But what's funny is, like, look at how safe it is, but yet even I was under the belief that it was crazy dangerous. And these pills are even safer than what was being depicted in, to help kind of maintain this belief that it shouldn't be allowed. Because really, we are protecting women, or at least I thought we were, right? From this barbaric procedure where they could just basically have their insides gored out of them, which is not at all what it's like. So yeah, I think it's even sadder to take away these medications. And the Plan B pill, that's, I will confess, I have done that once because there was a condom breakage issue. And you don't even know if there's been conception at that point. So normally, because I think it can be like, up to 5 days before actual conception can happen, like semen in the system versus actually meeting the egg. So if you're doing it the next morning, it's actually not very likely that life has begun. So if that's your concern, and again, this goes back to you having to make that decision as an individual who, is a vaginated human and suspects that maybe the birth control method you used wasn't effective, it's up to you to weigh whether or not you feel you might be committing murder. You know what I mean? So, but again, and those being used for ectopic pregnancies, I think it all just goes back to pro number 2 is like, leave it up to the doctors, right? Because most aren't doing these crazy late term things, or even worse, that weird rumor that happened for a hot second of like post-birth abortion, like that doctors were actually killing children, which that turned out to be absolute nonsense, by the way. Like that, no.
Of course. And I think that also, too, when it comes to late abortions, partial birth abortions, stuff like that, the numbers clearly show that, women, and I've said this before, women are not going to the 8th month of pregnancy with a perfectly viable fetus while in good health themselves and deciding at the last minute, oops, I changed my mind. That's not happening.
Right. And the ones that are, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the women that are having the late-term abortions are doing it because of medical reasons. Their health is in danger, or they have a fetus on the inside that is just not going to live.
Right. I did know somebody that very unfortunately she could just tell wasn't moving anymore. And so, so fortunately, living in the state we were in at the time, she did not have to carry that baby to birth. That is unfortunately what happens in some of these states where, there's no ifs, no buts, no coconuts. You are not allowed to have one. And if you can't afford the medical tourism to go take care of it, you're just going to have it induced, and you end up having to then give birth to this baby. And I don't know if this is going to be covered because I did not read his head like I normally would on all the pros and cons, because there were only three, and I think Tim and I decided yesterday, yeah, let's bring you back. But yeah, so sorry if that gets covered again somewhere else, about the later abortions. But as far as sticking to the pills and stuff, oh my gosh, I think that at the very least should be allowed, because these are the very early on decisions, especially Plan B. I would say Plan B, even being in this discussion, just feels so old mentality at this point.
Well, it's also, that reminds me too of some of these rules that they do want to put in place for abortion as well. Like, I think Texas is not the only one, but one of the people that are talking about wanting to monitor women that go to other states for their health care as well, so they can punish them for having the abortions as well. Like, how is that promoting life? It's not.
Right. And by the way, like, I feel like most women that make it that far to have a baby, they'll just go put it in a drop box, because there actually are baby drop boxes in states. There are some in Texas, and that's probably what has contributed to the foster care epidemic that they've kind of struggled with as long as I can remember. And a lot of that does, like I said, Texas is kind of a big central part of this conversation, and always has been. So I think that's why we're going to keep seeing Texas brought up in this.
Yeah, God bless Texas.
Oh, bless your heart.
Well, how about you dive into con number 2 here?
Legal abortion promotes a culture of which life is disposable. Echoing a 2014 remark by Pope Francis that connected abortion to, quote, throwaway culture, Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark, New Jersey stated abortion represents a failure to recognize the sanctity of human life and promotes a culture in which human life in its most vulnerable moment is perceived as disposable, such a proposal targets poor women as needing an expedient solution to a complex problem. Sorry, I had a hard time reading that one, not laughing. Tobin previously declared legal abortion a, quote, brutalization of the American heart, on par with the, quote, dehumanization of the undocumented immigrants. Alveda King, former Georgia state representative and niece of Martin Luther King Jr., also connected abortion to other societal ills. Abortion and racism are both symptoms of a fundamental human error. The error is thinking that when someone stands in the way of our wants, we can justify getting that person out of our lives. Abortion and racism stem from the same poisonous root, selfishness. We create the deceptions that the other person is less important, less worthy, less human. We are all fully human. When we face this truth, there is no justification for treating those who look different than us as lesser beings. If we simply treat other people the way we'd like to be treated, racism, abortion, and other forms of inhumanity will be things of the past. As King notes, some fetuses are treated as less than human. This ideology, combined with legal abortion, could create a slippery slope to designer babies. Gosh, I almost forgot about that stuff. Gender selection, termination of disabled but healthy fetuses, and other trait selection-based abortions. The slippery slope can then extend to the mentally disabled and elderly in general. Abortion is an act rife with the potential for eugenic manipulation, according to the U.S. Supreme Court Clarence Thomas. Technological advances have only heightened the eugenic potential for abortion, as abortion can now be used to eliminate children with unwanted characteristics such as particular sex or disability. So that's kind of a hard one, because I do see the point there. But oh man, it's rough, because it's not necessarily that the decision is always made for those reasons, right? So this is like casting, saying that it should never ever be legal because it can be used for something malicious, right? But we know there are other reasons for abortion. But damn, if they don't have a fair point. I actually did not know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s family, that somebody had stepped out and said something like that. It's like, and that's why I like reading these things, is sometimes you kind of learn, like, that is a way to think about it. But yeah, is it going to change my overall opinion that people should more or less be able to make decisions with their doctor? No, because I think this goes back again, that this can be something that's more mitigated by leaving that up to the doctor-patient relationship. But I don't know. What do you think? That's a mouthful one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this does kind of tie in with like an urban legend out there that Margaret Sanger, the person who I believe she was the one behind Planned Parenthood becoming a thing, that she was doing that because at the end of the day she was a racist herself, and that she was promoting that in order to get people of color to abort more, or something along those lines, which is just not true. And
Yeah.
Again, I think too what this is doing is legislating sex as well. Like people that do like to have sex a lot, like they just like, it's like, on the one hand, yeah, I get it. You should be responsible when you do have sex with another person in terms of, protecting your health and their health as well by using all the protection that you can. But it's not because, you want to dehumanize anybody or something like that, and
Right.
I also, again, like the example I brought up too about the young married couple, like, are you expecting them to just not have sex? There's this idea among the religious folks that sex should only happen for procreation purposes. And frankly, that's just wrong. Thanks to science, we have this ability to where consenting adults can enjoy sex a lot more, a lot safer. And yet
Right.
that's somehow a bad thing, like, and you also mentioned it as well too. The people that do have these negative views about abortion don't have things in place to make it easier for people to live their lives and not have to worry about stuff like this. Like, it's why are we taking the words once again of a religious person that has very narrow belief, like a Catholic person has very specific beliefs that not everybody agree with. They're not a politician. They should not be the ones judging whether this is something that should be put into law or not. And it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I don't like how some of this is kind of prefaced as if majority of abortions are like, whoops, I forgot to refill my birth control pill. I guess I could just run to the corner and get me an abortion if something happens. That's not majority of them. And as far as, people of lower economic status, that's kind of the decision sometimes they have to make. Raising a baby does cost a lot of money. So what are you asking there at that point? Because again, if you're going to have this position of saying, well, then we need to have a list of reasons that is acceptable and not acceptable. Okay? Because short of sterilization, and even then, sometimes that doesn't take, there is going to be a risk of pregnancy. Now, say one person has a really debilitating genetic disorder and they really don't want to pass that down, right? Like, at what point do we say that, and I think this is going to go right back to it needs to be between the doctor and the patient to decide. And now if we do want to have like circumstances in which it's not okay, hey, I'm too poor to raise a child. If we're going to say that that's not okay, then we need to have support so that that child is not having to be raised in poverty and therefore really just the opposite of privilege, right? So, yeah, and I go back to, because this tends to be that conservative side that wants this to be banned, is that their other big talking clapping point is don't have babies if you can't afford to raise them. But yet you also want to take away things like Plan B. I'll say Plan B because I haven't heard any more attacks on taking away the birth control pill, but there is kind of the point of it being a slippery slope at that point. At what point do you say you can't avoid a pregnancy while having sexual activity in your life? So if you're going to make that list, make that list. But I think ultimately that list is going to be vetted by who again? The doctor.
Yeah, and I think of like a single. You mentioned the money thing. I think of like a single mother who is pregnant. Like, financially, maybe she could pull off a healthy baby, but let's say she finds out her kid has Down syndrome or something like that. Is it really fair for that kid in the current economic times that we live in for that kid to be fully realized and be given birth to, and be raised by a mother who doesn't have the means to take care of it. If we don't have things in place that support parents in that particular position, which generally we generally don't, then abortion should be an option for people at the earliest stages. Again, I'm not talking about the 8.5 months deciding, whoops, I don't want it anymore. That's something totally different. At that point, you can give birth and set it up for adoption at that point. But if you're talking 6 weeks in and you know that there's going to be a particular issue, that's between the doctor and the patient. And to, paraphrase, Vice Presidential candidate Tim Walz, it's none of your damn business what they decide.
Right. I think ultimately it falls under placing judgment on somebody in which you are not in their shoes. And how comfortable are you going to honestly be with that at the end of the day? I mean, some people are extremely comfortable with it. Some people aren't. But yeah, I think if you're going to say that the sanctity of life argument and to not kind of have the slippery slope of disposable life mentality is, well, if that life is going to be viewed as not disposable, then it should be viewed as supportable. And maybe if you're going to be on this side of the argument, you should be on the pro side of women in certain economic situations getting the support they need to raise a child. And if that child does have something like Down syndrome, et cetera, which you can test ridiculously early for. So if this is your argument, then people can't even make decisions that early on if they have the means and ability to raise a child with any certain type of thing. Right? So I go back to, I don't think you can demand both. You can't demand don't have an abortion or don't have these choices, don't be able to prevent this pregnancy, but then also say, well, you shouldn't have had a kid if you couldn't afford to raise it.
It's a ridiculous
no help for you.
Too.
No help for you because you're irresponsible. Well, the banks got help and they were irresponsible, but whatever.
But they're people too, remember. Anyway, How about I dive into the last pro here?
Let's do this.
All right. Pro number 3, abortion bans deny bodily autonomy, creating wide-ranging repercussions. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen stated, eliminating the rights of women to make decisions about when and whether to have children would have very damaging effects on the economy and would set women back decades. In many cases, abortions are of teenage women, particularly low income and often Black, who aren't in a position to be able to care for children, have unexpected pregnancies, and it deprives them of the ability often to continue their education to later participate in the workforce. After being denied an abortion, household poverty increased and lasted 4 or more years, resulting in an inability to cover basic expenses, including food, housing, and transportation. A denied abortion was associated with a lowered credit score, increased debt, and an increase in negative public records, including evictions and bankruptcies. The households were also more reliant on government assistance. Transgender and non-binary people denied abortions may face even worse outcomes, and the consequences can be much more dire. If a woman of childbearing age dies, it has enormous economic consequences. It's someone who society has invested in and who has many productive economic years ahead of them, according to David Slutsky, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Kansas. Often, death also removes a wage earner and caregiver from the household. 60% of women seeking abortions already had other children. Being denied an abortion worsened the well-being of their older children, including not meeting childhood development markers. Women denied an abortion were more likely to have serious health complications, have poor physical and mental health for years afterward, and stayed with abusive partners. Women denied abortion were more likely to be raising their children alone 5 years later. The Turnaway study concluded abortion does not harm women, and women who receive a wanted abortion are more financially stable, set more ambitious goals, raise children under more stable conditions, and are more likely to have a wanted child later. I think of Loretta Lynn. She had a song called The Pill. And, she was a conservative person. Like in her later years, she actually, unfortunately, did vocally support Trump and all that stuff. But she did forcefully come out with this song about the birth control pill. And she said later on that, if that was around when she was younger and of child rearing age, she would have used it. And it's not because she would not have wanted the kids that she had, but maybe she would have had less. Maybe she would have had kids on a schedule that was more fitting for her, so she could, do more in her life. And I think that boils down to the autonomy part. Like, we are putting women in a spot to where we have older white guys telling them what they can do with their bodies. And I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Right. And for those that were confused, by the way, like why Roe v. Wade and the 14th Amendment had anything to do with each other, it really was about the right to body autonomy. So this topic right here is super pivotal to whether or not you feel Roe v. Wade was, judged correctly, or if it being overturned was the correct thing to do. It was about a right of body autonomy, because unfortunately, if two people get pregnant and the guy decides he wants nothing to do with it, see ya. I mean, we do have more technology now so that at least we could do paternity tests, and that can even be court ordered, so that then at least they're paying child support. But I don't know that that's necessarily the right answer, to that, because children who have, there's a lot of studies behind both parents, and this is not a neg on single parents. I do think single parents are amazing, awesome people. But as far as, it says sometimes give children a complex when the dad walks away, because there's that kind of thinking of like, well, I never mattered, right? Or, why wasn't I lovable and why not this? I actually know at least two humans personally that the father figure walked away, signed off their rights to them, etc. And it really did shake them to their core, and in ways it still does. So that's actually contributing to some negative mental health, especially in that situation where the father didn't want them. And I'm not saying that means, oh, okay, he doesn't want my steps get an abortion. No, not at all. Just I like to bring up factors to consider of how it can have effects after the fact. Like if you do have this child, and sometimes things that you need to be prepared to go over with them, if that's the decision that you made, is to still have them, right? Be prepared for that conversation, because it is significant. But I guess the abortion, where that relates to that is, abortion was the woman's ability to say, I don't want to do this, or I can't do this right now. Right? Because think
of households that do have abuse happening, and a woman gets pregnant by a man that is abusing her. If she's living in a state where she can't have an abortion, she's going to be tied to that person for a very, very long time. I'm sorry. How is that showing God's love? It's
right.
Not.
It's like, at what point are we going to recognize that any life is more important than the other?
Yeah, because what people are saying is that fetuses essentially have more rights than the woman that is carrying them to term.
Right. And I think that's where it gets to be super slippery.
Exactly.
Yeah, kind of sticky in a way. But like, since that's kind of, I think, a little bit more of the end of the religious arguments, because I actually kind of like con number 3, we mentioned kind of judgment in all of this. And I find it interesting because really there's a verse in the Bible that gets used a lot, and it's judge not lest ye be judged. And a lot of people use that as more of a don't judge me. Don't judge me. Don't judge me for what I do. You mind your business, right? But what's funny is that's really not the intent behind that sermon. If you read the whole sermon and don't just pick out that one part, it's really more about judging yourself. And if you do happen to be a person that ascribes to Christianity and believes in Jesus, and, so not trying to pull from the Old Testament, sticking to the New Testament, a lot of the idea of judging not lest ye be judged was to say, if you don't want to be judged at a certain point or to a certain caliber, like, you really need to be careful what you're judging people on. So it goes from there to also saying like, if so there's different interpretations, right? So depending on who is teaching you what a scripture means is going to kind of vary on what it is. But some of the other theories on that scripture is don't judge people for X, or you will be actually judged for that when you pass and are at the pearly gates, so to speak. So that being said, some people actually do mean that if you're that person calling somebody a murderer on a picket line in front of an abortion clinic, you might be surprised to, pass away, go for your judgment, and be called a murderer. So I think it just kind of goes to ultimately the point of a lot of the New Testament in this is to have more benefit of the doubt for these people and not actually literally looking to throw stones at them sometimes, and let them make their decisions, right? Like, yeah, unless you can't really fully judge that person because you are not in their shoes. You are making assumptions. And that even goes back to the prior con. My sticking point with it is that it's making the assumption that people are just aborting for basically, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, when at the end of the day, condoms cost far less than an abortion,
Right, if you can use them. Because, there are people who are allergic to condoms, for example. Does that mean they have to be completely celibate until marriage or afford the really expensive sheepskin ones or whatever is out there? I think they have more options nowadays, honestly, but
yeah, butt stuff. Anyway, how about you dive into the
butt
last
stuff.
one here?
There you go. Let's
Welcome
just
back.
get a clip of you saying butt stuff. Okay,
Yeah,
con number 3, and this is a con that I appreciate because I've already touched on it. Con number 3, increased access to birth control, health insurance, and sexual education would make abortion unnecessary. Abortion rates in the United States have fallen at what the CDC called a slow yet steady pace since a peak in 1981. That year, there were 29.3 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44. The rate fell to 11.4 abortions per 1,000 women in 2019. Experts largely contribute the decline in abortions in the United States and elsewhere to the improved safety and availability of LARC, long-acting reversible contraception, including IUDs and contraceptive implants that can last up to 10 years. IUDs for the win! Access to health insurance to pay for contraceptives also contributed to a drop in abortions. With the passage of Obamacare, Patient Protected and Affordable Care Act, more people were insured with access to free or low-cost contraceptives and reproductive care. Linda Rosenstock, public health professor of health policy and management at UCLA, summarized the simplicity of the connection. In the United States, each year, about half of pregnancies are unintended and about 40% of those lead to abortion. Access to birth control leads to fewer abortions. Further, teens are having sex later in life than their parents. 38.4% of American high schoolers reported they have had sex, down from 54% in 1991. And only 27.4% reported they were currently sexually active, 37.5% in 91. Because teen birth control use has not increased significantly, experts attribute the decline in part to better sex education. A 2021 study found that the students who received comprehensive sexual education initiated sex later than students who did not participate in sex ed. The later teens have sex, the less chance is for them to become pregnant unintentionally, which leads to fewer abortions. Historically, abortion was a popular means of birth control and family planning due to lack of reliable contraception, education, and other resources. And the fact that childbirth was incredibly dangerous. Better options are now available, including more effective birth control, better health care, and health insurance, and sex education to ensure an unwanted pregnancy does not happen in the first place. And to me, I feel like this is the most reasonable con. However, as we've discussed, unfortunately, people that seem to be anti-abortion also seem to be anti-providing a level of state care for people who can't afford health care. Or also tend to be the ones that are historically against teaching sex ed in school and leaving it up to the parents, right? So I do love Con 3. I would even stand by Con 3, but the problem is what are we doing to make that happen so that we can just further drive it down? And in which case, if we're making these things happen, but yet we still see medically viable reasons for abortion to happen, then wouldn't it just be a self-correcting problem to allow both things to continue?
I definitely agree with you on that. I mean, this con, yes, I mean, you do provide more tools for people to be safe, to enjoy sex, while not having to worry about pregnancy, while not having to worry about STDs or something like that. Then, yeah, there is going to be less need for having an abortion. And economically, you would think that would be one reason why people would be for that. But again, I think the pro-life people are not. It shows when you have people that are against this stuff what their intentions really truly are, and that's essentially keeping people in their place.
Right, and I think that's like where I wish more people that were of the religious mindset. If you really wanted to protect and save fetuses because you feel that that is when the spirit begins and that is when life begins, shouldn't you then be supporting then access to healthcare, access to birth control methods so that it's not ever that ethical dilemma for somebody? I mean, I fortunately have never been in a position to have to decide that. The Mr. Reverend and I talked early on, because there are testings available super early for a lot of the, genetic disorders, right? And genetic disabilities or genetic disorders, whichever one you want to call it. And technically, I think there's a little bit of column A and column B there. I just don't remember what the signifier between them is. But yeah, you can get that tested early. And that was something that if certain things came up, I knew we were going to have a very serious talk as to what that would mean. But again, I think it just goes back to this con for me more says if you don't want fetuses to be aborted, then you need to support and or continue supporting sex education and access to healthcare. Because then you don't even have to fight whether or not abortion is legal or not, because it's just going to keep driving down that number. So isn't that a little bit more in the control then? And I feel like it makes more sense too, because there are justified medical reasons to not carry a child to term. I mean, look at people who are on, what is it? Accutane? Is that one of it was like an acne medicine. And if you're on that, it can cause such deformities, I guess, in the fetus that you pretty much are told, no, you need to get an abortion. So see, as long as we have that, then we shouldn't make it illegal. We should just leave it up to the doctors so we're not getting over involved, right? Because it goes back to typically the people on the con side are also wanting more limited government to not get over involved. So instead of them making a list of this is when it can happen and when it cannot, I still kind of feel like the answer is let doctors and patients decide what's best for that patient, and put your resources instead of, paying, the lobbyists or however far it goes to support banning abortion. It seems like it would actually be more effective and safer for everybody involved if you took that same effort and that same funding and put it into family planning education and sex education and access to healthcare.
Well, yeah, and you take a look at the economic aspects of it. I mean, think about the young couple that may be married, may not be married, but they are a committed romantic couple. If they are able to control when and or if they do have a child, they are going to be tax-paying citizens a lot longer. You're going to have a woman who's not going to have to worry about being on the shelf for 9 months or longer because of childcare. Because even if you have a healthy child, you're going to have a child that once they go to school could mess up or get sick, and you may have to go home and miss a couple of days of work, and that is going to economically kick you in the pants. I mean, most employers will understand, but if it gets to a point, you may lose a job too. And why not have it to where these people can choose when they do create that life? But again, I think the hardcore pro-life people, their goal here is to essentially stop people having sex, and good luck with that. It's not going to happen.
It does feel like it, but yeah, like even to your point, I believe it was up in pro number 1, like making it illegal actually doesn't decrease the number. So if your goal really is to decrease the number of fetuses that are aborted, then you should be supporting these other things. Like,
Exactly.
period. Because really, if you're just saying ban the abortion, all you're doing is endangering yet another life. And
Exactly.
it goes back to, if you do believe in that judgment after life is over, leave that between God and the people who made the decisions. Leave that between God and the doctors who performed them willingly. Leave that between God and the person who had to make the choice. Because also, I don't think for most people it's an easy choice to do that. Like, I personally haven't had one. I know one of my dear friends did, and I know how much that really shook her. And it was a very difficult decision for her to make. She had her reasons. I'm not going to go into them. But yeah, it's not something that you like, well, just skip down the street and I'm going to have me an abortion. You know what? I think I'll get a latte on the way home. You know, it's not that lighthearted for most people making this choice. And so I think yeah, not to beat a dead horse about it, I just think it needs to be left between the doctors and the patients, and between God and the involved people, if that's really your side of it, is looking at it from a religious side.
Yeah, because there are not women that have like little punch cards, after the 7th abortion, the 8th one is free. They're not doing
Right.
that,
It's absolutely ridiculous. No, that's not a thing. And actually, any responsible doctor, and again, this would require healthcare access, and preferably to the same doctor, so that you're seeing the same one and not just having to go to a clinic because that's what you can afford or that's what works on a sliding system, is that if you are using abortions as birth control, you tend to get talked to at some point. Like, no doctor, because I mean, it is going to be less risk of harm to practice safe sex or practice abstinence, whatever your choice is, but they're not going to encourage repeat abortions. That's just not something that happens. I don't even think there's, because I mean, I guess there could be like an argument for big pharma making money from the pills. But again, those pills exist because it's safer than the other options. So at that point, I kind of let big pharma have the win on that one because it's safer, and I want to go towards things that are safer. I think if I'm going to be answering to anybody at the end of life, I can't help with the Bible that, I was taught to study back in my college days. I don't see God saying, how dare you not pick an abortion?
And one more point on this particular thing too, even with more access to education and healthcare stuff like IUDs and all that stuff. I'm sorry, if there is a loving God, I don't think that God is going to damn a 10-year-old girl to hell because a relative decided to get her pregnant. I don't think that 10-year-old should carry that to term, even if that kid goes up for adoption. That is traumatic. And
Exactly.
I mean, how people can rationalize that in their head as, it was a gift from God from a bad, tragic circumstance. No, it's a 10-year-old kid.
Right.
It's like, even if you do provide these tools for consenting adults to not have to worry about having an unnecessary abortion, in terms of, having proper, tools available and proper education, there's still going to be a need for it. And this unnecessary judgment on people, especially 10-year-old girls. I go back to that girl in Ohio, like she can't be the only one. There has to be plenty more that are having to deal with this. It's like we got to focus on why we have this stigma here. And to your point, yeah, like I get it. Like, women take this seriously too. And there's a lot we need to change. There's a lot we need to change. And, instead of me rambling on, how about, I know you had a final summation you wanted to give because of your history.
Oh, no, I mean, I think I kind of touched on it earlier just a little bit, but I guess just to really sum it up is, like, I don't believe laws should be made by religious assumption. If we want to sit there and get a board of doctors and try to figure out at what point does it constitute murder, okay, I guess do that. Because a lot of that is, if murder is illegal, well, then this is murder, so it should be illegal. But have we decided that it's murder? Because we don't treat every miscarriage like a homicide, right? Like we don't go and investigate all of it. So but using religious text seems to be very, very iffy on whether or not we're going to decide that that's how we know that when life begins. But really, it was just kind of talking about judge not lest ye be judged, right? And how that's often used for don't judge me. So some of the top ways to think about that verse that I'd found was basically don't judge others without being prepared to be judged. Don't judge others and you won't be judged. Don't take God's place in declaring who is righteous and who is unrighteous, and things like that. So, I mean, like I said, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier of this is one of those examples to apply that, guys. If you are a Christian, it's technically not your place to do this unless you either want to risk being judged very harshly for any and all of your mistakes. And something that I can own, one of the more harsh beliefs I think that in regarding this that I recall circulating, in my religious upbringing in the Bible Belt. And again, I confess that these are some of my beliefs that I used to hold before I got more educated and sophisticated in the world and met more people and understood more things. But that you should make it illegal because if murder is illegal, then this is still murder and therefore it should be illegal, right? And I still remember one of the more harsh sides of that in bringing up, well, they're going to do it anyway, right? To pro number one, that's actually a fact, as it still happens. And one of the harsher things was that, hey, but they're going to do it anyway, and it's more dangerous to the mother and she could die. And a lot of people in that certain type of belief system tend to believe, well, then she had it coming. And I think what's unfortunate about that mentality is if you care about somebody's immortal soul, then you should actually want a system in which they can live so they can then repent. Not, she's going to go to hell now. It was one of the weirder ones. How are we teaching that we're supposed to be, helping guide people to Christ and stuff like that? But for some reason, this is the thing where it's no.
I think of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think one area that they do have it right is because of their name. Jehovah's Witnesses. Why did they get that name? Because the leader of that group at that particular time felt that in order for people to take them seriously and take the word that they're delivering to people seriously, they have to be a witness for the goodness that, for what they are trying to teach. And I think that does go along with the judge not lest ye be judged aspect here, because to your point, how is someone, stating, well, that mother deserved to die because she had a back alley abortion? How is that showing God's love? How is that being a proper witness to fellow people about the love of your, magical sky being? I think I would have a lot more susceptibility of being religious myself if there were more people that were more loving like that. If there were more Mr. Rogers in the clergy than there were Jerry Falwells. Yeah.
Yeah, the more compassionate path, and it seems to be that even follows the numbers of what we've read on a scientific level, is that if you really are worried about decreasing both the fatalities of fetuses and the fatalities of the mothers involved in that situation, banning abortion probably isn't the way to go. But yeah, essentially, if you're going to have the belief that you want to protect fetuses, even if you're the uncaring person about, well, she had it coming, the numbers even follow that you should be supporting access to the health care, in general. Because if they have access to health care, first of all, they're actually more likely to have a healthy fetus if they do decide, right, to keep that child. So there's that part of it, even access to health care being better for those who choose to keep it. But for those that don't, we shouldn't be condemning those people. They should be surviving. Therefore, again, in a lot of what you read, should be surviving and then have that chance to repent, because that was the purpose of kind of the forgiveness elements in the New Testament and what Jesus died to, give people the right for under that belief system. So I really don't understand, I guess nowadays, I don't understand why we're using the religious text and saying we need to make it illegal, when really it feels like it should be that act of service to make sure donations are getting to the women who couldn't afford to have children, or donations are getting to go to these clinics so that women can feel more supported and able to support having a child.
Yeah, and I think the numbers show that, like, the average citizen on the street, no matter where they are in the United States, generally believe that. It's just we're not putting people into office that are supporting that.
Right.
So thankfully we've solved the problem here, folks. So thank us. No, we didn't.
No, we don't claim to solve anything. It's just, if you're pro-life or pro-choice, I feel like there were fair points on both sides, to be honest, especially whenever you look at like the things that were said by the what was it, the grandniece or something of Martin Luther King. I already forgot who that was.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. No.
I'm just saying, con number 2, I think, made the best point for that, and even con number 3. So really, 2 out of 3 of the cons having fair points is not bad. But I still I don't feel like con 3 really supports making abortion illegal. I think con 3 more just says we don't really need to make it illegal if we're supporting these systems that'll actually help. If women who don't have the money or the resources to raise a child can apply and get those resources, instead of being told by the same people that didn't want her to have the abortion, well, you shouldn't have had a kid if you couldn't have afford to raise it, pick your stance, I guess.
Yeah, and that is, again, the purpose of why we bring this up here, to be able to honestly air out both sides of this argument so people can understand where people are coming from. Because once that can occur in an ideal situation, compromise can begin to happen. Because, like I said, this is the United States. Even though I'm an atheist myself, I would fully support a consenting adult having religious beliefs, even if I don't agree with them. If they want to live their life based on those beliefs, I'm going to support that, because that's what made this country successful.
Right.
The problem becomes once those people, those religious people, want to start putting politicians into office that to legislate their beliefs onto others, because maybe there's not a big difference between a Methodist and Episcopalian, but there's going to be a big difference between a Methodist and a Pentecostal. There's going to be, because people in political circles throw around the term Christian like it's some unified thing when it's really not.
Right.
So take the time to study this issue, people, and even if you are pro-choice till you die, still try and hear people out, because the only way we're going to be able to solve anything is if we don't have this, my team must win mentality, I guess.
Right.
We have to be able to come to some sort of a solution. Like, I remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg, talked about how when she was alive, how she felt that Roe v. Wade was probably not the best way to get abortion legalized in this country. And her logic was that having it decided through the courts and not on a state-by-state basis, kind of like what gay marriage did, made it to where people were a lot more resistant to it, because they didn't have the state-by-state thing to where people could say, support this because X, Y, and Z, and then people would vote in turn.
Right.
So this has just been a grand experiment that we've been living through, and it's put a lot of women through a lot of economic hell and physical hell, and we have to change, because if we keep going down this course, like, more women are going to be their economic position is going to be affected, their physical position is going to be affected. You're going to have kids that if they're healthy, they could be raised by parents who may not want them, and imagine how that's going to be.
Right. And I also think, to the flip side is, from being pro-choice to death, you can be pro-life for till death too, right? Like and I think that's something that's worth taking away from this is you can be pro-life, but still respect and even to some point support a pro-choice culture and understanding that other people are going to make their choices. If your God is the right God, they are going to answer for that. But you judging them and pushing your beliefs by, basically legislating and forcing them into following laws of your religion, I just don't think that that's the way Jesus would have intended it.
Yeah, I mean, and I love the hypocrisy too, because the same people that want to do that are the same ones like Sharia law, no.
And they're also the same ones that go, well, an eye for an eye to support the death penalty. So it's like, what lives are you actually valuing here?
Yeah. Anyway.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Dylan.
And I'm Cameron.
And we're the hosts of Barstool Film School, a conversational comedy podcast about the very best Marvel movies. You know, the ones that are like perfect to watch when you're hanging out in a bar with friends. Now, I'm a writer and a film school washout.
And I'm a bar owner.
So we ought to know what we're talking about.
You would hope.
Tune in every other week, wherever you get your pods, as we take on a new flick.
And we will pair those flicks with some cocktails.
To see if they pass the bar. Now, what do you say, Cam? Shall we pour ourselves another round?
Let's do it.
All right.
All right. Before we wrap things up here, welcome back. I've definitely missed you.
Oh, I've missed you guys too. It's just been a lot of energy and in ways recovering from having the baby Reverend. He's an awesome little guy, man. Who knows? Maybe we could do some of his funnier sound bites as some of the intros to the show. I don't want to accidentally turn it into the Baby Reverend pod or anything, but we do have some fun. He's smiley. He's got a character. He's very willful. For some reason, tall. I don't know where that came from, but he's like in the 75th percentile. And for those of you that don't know what that means, it means if you line up 100 babies and put like the average height in the middle, that would be the 50th. So he's like taller than the average babe. And, the Mr. Reverend and I are standing here just like, Shrug City, man. I have no idea where this came from, but hey, maybe he can play basketball.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm at the cutoff point. Like people that are taller than me, like if you're over 7 feet tall, 1 in 4 people who are 7 feet tall have been approached and have played basketball just because of their height alone. An easy way to make money if you're tall, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And then just recovering from, the real talk is, had some depression and anxiety there for a while, and I'm still working through things in a lot of ways, but I'm getting more energy every day. Gotta love medications. They can be helpful if you realize you're kind of at a point of like, oh, dude, my mental health, man. And I know Tim the Nerd and I have talked a little bit more of that, one-on-one private style through messaging, but, getting better. I definitely really did rewatch the first few episodes of Human Resources. And wow, does that take significantly more meaning with the need monster specifically, like how your little need monster becomes so little and how easy it is just to compact it down. And it's not that people aren't supporting you or aren't trying to support you. It's just this very interesting dynamic is that when their needs are super high in the beginning, it almost felt like that biological connection, like balancing out of like my needs had to be significantly smaller. And so it did kind of make me look at, like maybe there is a level of postpartum depression and or anxiety that's like healthy, but there is obviously like a point where it's not, right? But because yes, your need for sleep should come second to the newborn baby's need to eat every 2 hours, right? And I know they didn't necessarily go into it on that level on Human Resources, but it was just kind of cool. It helped. It helped me like realize that, okay, well, my need monster is really, really small. I should do something about that.
Yeah, that is definitely something. I mean, I've been a parent myself. Thankfully, my kids are all grown now, thank goodness. But having said that, they all still have their own issues as well. This whole parent trip doesn't stop at a particular age, So you're always got to be Yeah, you're always going to be there advising, doing something, and trying to be supportive if you can. But yeah, it is vital, and it's easy to disregard your own needs because the kid is there. But then what I found, like when my kids were, the age of the baby reverend, is that the more you do that, the more crabby you get, and the less effective you get as a parent.
Oh, yes, exactly. So it's like kind of realizing that need to unplug in that sense, and understanding like, well, that sure did have its time. But now that he's more of a toddler, it's still continuing at that point. I'm like, well, I should probably get some help. 'Cause, I mean, he's growing fast. And so he's basically already to like, whatever, mumsy, see you later. No, not really. But he's talking. He's way more, playing on his own these days, which is super funny because I went the baby wearing route. And I feel like I got told ad nauseum that I was going to turn him into some kind of clingy monster that never let me go. But nope, no. Half the day he's just saying "Dada," like where's Dada? Yeah, that's great. You're here, but where's my dad?
Yeah, you're okay, but hey, you. Reminds me of that old. I mean, we're not going to say his name. Hey, hey, hey! But he had a joke about how a young father will help a young kid, play football and be good at it and help him get better and better. The kid joins a football team, ends up winning a championship, and the first person he thanks is mom. But
oh yeah. But it's been quite the adventure, but I am happy to finally be getting more energy back and ability to do other things as he gets a little bit more independent, which, a lot of parents will say that it's like, kind of sad. And I don't know. I guess that's the part that I can't relate to. I'm mostly excited as more words come. That's my next excitement. I just want him to be able to tell me he's hungry. Instead of, oh, okay, well, you're upset. Now what? I mean, you do get kind of good at knowing them, especially once they get to the toddler phase because you've been around them so much. But yeah, that's my next, like, nope, I think as cute as the infant and toddler stages, I'm super excited for the talking. And everybody says, you say that until they start talking. And I'm like, nope, I value clear communication way too much to not want it.
And we will have this on recording for you at a later point to remind you because, I mean, there will be, like I had plenty of moments, and every parent is going to have those moments, like when you have a teenager that mouths off to you and you're like, I wish you were a baby again. Shut up.
If only you had been a mute.
But then they would be signing at you, I don't like you, Mom. And then off.
And then I got to learn another language to understand I'm being told to fuck off.
Yeah. Or slang, they'll use new slang words on you. And you're going to be on quite the journey. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yes. Please do feel free to bring that up. I'm okay with eating my own words. I'm oddly okay with that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, once again, definitely glad to have you back. Just you have always been one of the heartbeats of the show, and whether it be weekly, monthly, or however, we get you back here on the show. I'm definitely glad to have you back, and with the Baby Reverend, hopefully we can get him to a point to where he can record "Welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy." We could put that at the start of the show.
We could try that out for sure. But on a funny note, I did something. I donated $1 so I could get Tim Walt's recipe, and we did make it. So I am going to try to get my foot back in making little TikTok videos, guys. So I don't know how often I'm going to be contributing on the show. I hope it went well for you guys listening today. Please bear in mind, this is my first time doing this with a toddler in the background and several "shit, did Tim hear that" moments. But fortunately, I have a really good headset, and apparently none of it came through. So future recordings should be a little bit more smooth again, I would assume. But yeah, I'm super excited to be back, and I'm gonna, if you haven't already noticed, I've tried my hand at making some memes to deflect some of the current political stuff with humor that I hope has been enjoyed by our crowd. And keep a look for TikTok, and I'll see how often I can hopefully get around to being on these recordings again. It's been good.
Well, damn right. All right. So, with that, I think we'll wrap things up. Each Monday, we'll have something in this podcasting space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
See you later.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Goodbye, darling.